Morning, everyone. So very quick intros, and thank you for coming along today. My name is Gavin Starks, the founder of Icebreaker One. We're a non-profit dedicated to making data work harder to deliver net zero. It's kind of clear challenge of our time. I've got multiple hats. I'm also the co-chair of the Smart Data Council alongside Minister Hollenrijk. Its ambition is to take the principles of open banking and apply them across the economy, very much aligned with the data bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. Hopefully that will go to Royal Assent in Q2 this year. So there's a lot happening in the data world. A lot of it is incredibly positive, so it's about protecting data rights as well as unlocking access to data. And I'll talk a little bit about the definitions of open, the difference between open data and open access, which gets confused on a minute-by-minute basis, I think, in the world. By way of background as well, I co-chaired the Open Banking Standards, and I used to run the Open Data Institute. What I'm going to talk to you about today is a program that we've been running for about a year now called Perseus. The ambition of Perseus is to automate sustainability reporting for every SME in the country. But I'm going to start with keeping it entertaining. I'm going to play a 2-minute video just to help orient about what it is. And the thing, apart from understanding the project, one of the big things that we try and do is communicate the value of data sharing in a way that people can actually understand. That takes quite a lot of effort, and my colleagues at the ODI here know very well that the vertical climb it is to get anybody to understand what data is.
What if we could fix sustainability reporting with a single click? Business emissions data is currently as useful as a solar-powered torch in a cave. For small businesses, it's hard to report, and for corporations and banks, it's not always accurate enough to trust. It's not the fault of businesses. There are so many acronyms to wade through, and data standards are anything but standard. We need trusted data to flow freely and automatically between energy companies, banks, and third parties like accountants. But standardizing, verifying, and sharing data securely across industries is complex. To manage this complexity, you need to build trust. That's what Project Perseus is building. And we know how, because we helped design Open Banking, the system that helps millions of people share financial data safely. We'll start by doing one thing well. Small UK businesses account for half of the UK's GHG emissions, so our demo focuses there, specifically their electric smart meter data. Let's see how Project Perseus helps. Imagine you're an accountant. You've been tasked with reporting emissions for your business. You struggle through all the rules, regulations, and bills. But after weeks of effort, you're frustrated. Then, you notice a new tab on your accounting software. With one click, you give permission to share your data with your reporting software. The software does the rest. You've just entered the world of trusted one-click reporting. You can also share relevant data with your bank, which could unlock more green finance, or with developers, so they can build better reporting apps. Whoever you share your data with, you're always in control of who sees what. All of which takes us closer to our net zero targets. Perseus is supported by the UK government, alongside the world's biggest banks, carbon and accounting solutions and more. Guiding such a large coalition through obstacles efficiently requires strong guiding principles. We call ours ice-breaking, and it's helping the right people work together to efficiently unlock the flow of UK emissions data. But we need your help. To go far, we must go together. Join the journey now.
Okay, so a lot of concepts in there, and I'm going to now spend a bit of time unpacking what's that all about then. Hopefully that made clear why we're doing this, but let me really get into the, let's come to the next slide, into the details here. By the end of today, what I'd like you to have is a good understanding, or better understanding, of what's upon us. There's a lot of things that have changed in the last few years. Some of them are now mandatory. This is going to affect every business in the world. And I don't say that lightly. What's been happening is that the financial community, so the banks, the asset managers, the insurance companies, lenders, and so on, now have mandatory reporting requirements on the impact of their investments. So if a bank gives a mortgage or makes a loan to anyone, they have to report on the greenhouse gas emissions for that loan. That means kind of everybody, right? So in the UK, that's 5.5 million SMEs. And if you imagine going out to an SME and saying, please tell me your footprint, if I said that to each business in this room, you'd look at me blankly and kind of go, well, I'll quickly Google for an online calculator, maybe make up a number. But that number will almost certainly, not almost certainly, it will be wrong. We at least won't be accurate. So the way that the banks have had to do this is they've had to say, well, we'll look at how much people are spending on things like energy, and we'll translate the amount spent into a carbon number. Now, that is also quite inaccurate as a process. But that's the beginning of this journey, right? So what we're seeing here is that the financial ecosystem, all of the money, has to now start reporting on the environmental impact of their spend. That applies to big companies. So if you're over a certain turnover, you've got mandatory reporting on not just your business, but also now your supply chain. So this suddenly is a massive federated data problem. And for the people in this room, you know how to solve that. It's called the web. We've been doing it for a while, right? But the technical solution to this is not the challenge. It's really a cultural challenge. But just want to cement here, the starting point, and we are at the beginning of this journey, is carbon reporting. But what is also coming very, very quickly is the rest of nature. There's a nature-based related reporting as well. And what we want to see in a program like Perseus is starting to commoditize access to the underlying data so that everybody can use it to deliver better analytics, deliver their accounting, their audit, their insights, their planning, their capital allocation plans. Where does all of the money go from? And I'll come back to some of the structural pieces on this. But I'm going to bamboozle you for a minute with how complicated is this and how urgent is it that we simplify it. So this is on one slide, very roughly, how sustainability reporting standards are implemented in the world. So at the very top level there, you've got science through organizations like the IPCC, translated into policy and regulation through governments, translated into standards and into reporting frameworks and into methodologies, and there's a whole acronym soup in there of things, dozens and dozens of different standards. And then they point to methodologies, and those methodologies say, if you take X kilowatt hours of energy, multiply it by this number for this country, you'll get a carbon value. And that's before you get to this middle box of the accountants. So companies like Sage and Intuit and other carbon reporting tools have to now absorb information that they're not used to absorbing. It's not just taking in financial data anymore, how much have you spent, linking in with your bank accounts, but taking in here from the bottom left, all resources, all consumption of every type, manufacturing, distribution, etc. So there's a huge amount of information in there that is not digital. We'd love to think it was digital, it's really not. And it's not well structured. We'd love to think there were lots of open standards that are being used. Yes, there are, they're all over the place. And the impact of this on the accounting is that the numbers and the reports that are being produced are wrong. You know, in some cases, quite materially wrong. They're wrong enough that we're starting to see a phenomenon called green hushing, where companies are publishing their reports, the usual PDF file that says, we will do this in the future, but then are stopping publishing data altogether because they're worried about being sued, and they should be worried about being sued because the numbers might be quite materially wrong. And the impact on the rest of us then is that on the bottom right here, the ratings agencies and the markets and the people with the money have to make a decision on how they're going to invest hundreds of billions, now trillions, you know, trillion is the new billion, in the net zero journey. And they're basing that on mostly narratives and not great data. And that means the funding that's flowing back to the real economy. So if you want to create an intervention, how do we work out what that should be? Certainly, larger companies have more resources. They can and have been investing heavily in this. And organizations like Microsoft have been having an internal carbon market for, I think it's over a decade now. But they can afford to. The rest of it can't. And that's a real problem. So when we look at all of this complexity and imagine putting this in front of a 5-person small company, you know exactly what the reaction is going to be. And an example here is actually worse than you think. There's an example from the Federation of Small Businesses where they said there's a dairy farmer. They get asked from 5 different customers to fill in 5 different questionnaires. So already you're creating a high barrier to entry. That ask different questions and give different answers for the same milk in the same shed from the same cows. And their reaction to that is to fill in none of them. So that's, again, taking us to the worst case kind of outcome. And that leaves everybody blind. And so Perseus here, the ambition is to help automate sustainability reporting for every SME in the UK, to create assurable and accurate data so that the financial community can have trusted information upon which to make investments. And from a financial perspective, what that means is de-risking those investments when they're looking at benchmarking people and looking at profiling them against what needs to happen, but also tracking the impact of those investments on a continuous basis. So that sounds quite sensible. How do we do that? Well, it's a very complicated diagram, but I'm going to come back to that. But let me start with, how do we do this together? So what we set out last year was 2 objectives. One was to do one thing well, and the second was to go far together. The go far together means bringing together industry and government, public and private sector, small companies and large companies, to define what good looks like. And what we've done at the high level here is brought together a phenomenal coalition of organizations, including the UK government. But you'll see on this list, you've got the Institute of Directors, you've got the Institute of Chartered Accountants, you've got the British Business Bank, you've got the UK Finance that represents all of the banks in the UK. You've got Energy UK that represents all of the energy companies, the Lending Standards Boards, the Federation of Small Business, and more. And this is all underneath the umbrella of this global group called GFANZ, which sits under the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative. There's a whole cascade of, if you like, air cover here. And because it's got that air cover, we also have observers from other countries and other organizations watching what we're doing in the UK and saying, if you can fix this in the UK, we'll take it internationally. And that includes the International Chambers of Commerce, the Institutional Investor Group on Climate Change, that I think between them represent about 50 trillion worth of assets. So these are not small numbers. And everyone has the same challenge. They need trusted data to flow through the ecosystem so they can make lending and investment decisions. That's the starting point. We've also managed to bring on board a whole range of commercial providers. So the accountancy firms like Sage and Intuit, the banks, NatWest, HSBC, and more are joining as we go. And all of this was put together in 6 months. So there's a real sense, just to give people some hope here, the individual organizations around this table, and the table's getting quite big now, it's 150 people. Individually, everybody is very motivated to do things. And organizationally, they're also committed to doing this, because it's not just a CSR activity, it's not just a corporate social responsibility, it's not just an ESG activity, environment, social and governance activity, it's core to their financial futures, because this is now becoming regulated. As soon as a regulator in the financial sector says something, the industry says, we've got to do this. So there's a whole range of things that are coming together here in a really helpful way. So last year we published a report, we got people together to say what is needed. Now this is the kind of equivalent of writing the open banking standard. When we first created the open banking standard, 150 people got together and wrote it in 3 months, version 1. Now, as I was chairing that, I went, I wonder if we could do that again. It has taken a while. It's taken about 7 years to do it again. But we did it again last year with this program. We didn't have Treasury breathing down our necks to say, thou shalt do it, which would have been nice, actually. But the good news there is the industry got together and said, let's do it. And when it comes to how to make this happen, I think there are a couple of design principles. One is the do one thing well, which I'll come back to at multiple points. Secondly, everything we produce under Icebreaker 1 is openly licensed. So this document is CC by attribution only. You can do whatever you like with it. And we presented it at COP as part of the UK delegation. So we're able to get the visibility of the project and get it in the ear of the right people and keep it open. And what does that actually mean? So I'm going to go walk through the detail now, because it's a geek crowd, so I like feeding you the information you like. So we're starting with electricity data. So in carbon reporting, the one thing that's ubiquitous across all companies is everybody uses electricity. Not everybody uses gas, not everybody uses other things, but we'll start with electricity. So electricity is used by everybody, it's in every methodology, and it's the most digital of all the utilities. It's not completely digital. Again, we'd love it if everything was digitized, if everybody had a smart meter, and that the smart meters worked and were easy to access the data. None of those things are particularly easy. However, let's just walk through what this means. So when we look at the carbon footprint of electricity, you've got the electricity mix in the national grid. It's distributed by different organizations like SSE, UK Power Networks, and so on. We already in the UK calculate the carbon emissions of the national grids on a 30-minute basis and a time and place basis. So we have that information. You then have energy retailers who sell that into SMEs. And for the SMEs who do have a smart meter, and there's over 500,000 of them in the UK, all of that information is collected in various different ways, but it's 30-minute resolution data. What we're saying here is we can take the 30-minute carbon intensity of the grid and the 30-minute consumption data and put an audit trail behind it. We can have assurance throughout this chain, which is what the banks need. The software companies can then take all that in, mash it up with all the other information they've got, and create a personalized report for every company with one click, because at this point here, the SME just says permission granted. The same as consent in open banking. The software application can then make personalized recommendations of what the intervention should be for that SME. And at that point, the accountants and the banks can have a conversation, could be an automated conversation, to say, here's a personalized financial product to fund an intervention that will help you on the road to zero. So again, trying to get things onto one slide is very difficult, but that's the chain of data flow. At the right-hand side of that, the bank's creating personalized investment plans for their customers. If the SME chooses to do that and they implement something that impacts, in this case, the carbon intensity of their electricity, so let's see here, they put on a whole bunch of solar, renewables, then that will come through the data flow. So you'll have a measured, verifiable reporting in this chain. Now, from a bank's point of view, again, this takes them from a very low score in terms of their risk profiling to the top score in the standards. So their confidence in lending goes up. And we've heard two things from the banks. One is they've got tens of billions of pounds that they want to invest in UK SMEs on the race to zero as part of their corporate strategy. This will help them unlock access to that capital. And if they can get assurable data through the chain, they can start offering different kinds of financial incentive. For example, you might get a lower interest rate if you can provide assurable data through the chain. So that at a very high level is what we're trying to build. I want to orient this on the data spectrum. Again, we're starting with electricity. It's not the end point, it's the start point. So smart meter data sits down here on the spectrum. So this is much closer to open banking than it is to proper open data. Open data, just as a reminder, is openly licensed for use by anyone for any purpose for free. I find myself saying this, I think I've been saying it for about 15, 20 years now, almost every other day, because there is a bit of a weird thing happening right now in that people talk about open data, and what they mean is access to data in a controlled environment. They mean an open market, a bit like open banking. What we're talking about here is something that is more at the shared end of the spectrum. However, the entire system behind it, the policy, legal codes, the contracts, the standards, etc., are all open, because this needs to be an open market. Technically, because I'm sure there's some geeks in the room as well, underpinning all of this is the same architecture as open banking. There's a thing called a trust framework, and really all that does is it keeps sets of keys in a directory and says, can you all trust each other? Can all the machines in this system trust each other, and can all the organizations in this system trust each other? And once that authentication is done, the data flows directly from the API of the smart meter energy data provider into the API of the carbon accounting firm or the bank, but with the permission of the customer. And that permission piece is the hard bit, actually. It's the reason why you need this architecture. People are doing this today, but they're just going and harvesting all the data. They're putting a little extra term in their conditions, a bit like before open banking. The banks were all sharing data and just adding little terms and conditions things, saying, oh, we can use this for other purposes. That's no longer good enough, and the data bill will help move the needle on that, and the work we're doing on the Smart Data Council will move the needle on this. So that's why we're working with government departments to say, you now must start introducing these kind of architectures. Ultimately, the benefit is for everybody. And this is, again, when we're talking about open projects, if you have a takeaway from today, please take away that you must articulate the value to all of your stakeholders before you start. If I'd started today with a technical presentation, I'd have lost all the business people in the room. Starting with the value case, hopefully I kept the techies in the room like on side, but we put a lot of effort into saying what is in this for the banks. And because what's in it for the banks is the ability to release billions in capital, everybody else in the chain goes, well, if they're going to unlock billions, we'll be able to get some money out of some part of that ecosystem. So we're in too. And that's why everybody's lent in at one level. There's obviously a huge efficiency for everybody in doing this collectively, getting everybody to align on how they're actually doing a carbon footprint in the first place. Because believe it or not, even with the standards, with all the methodologies, you still end up with everybody doing it differently. So you've got no comparability, and with no comparability, we're a bit lost. Again, we're flying blind. How do I choose between investing in that company or that company? I can't. So there's lots of value points here for the banks, for the SMEs. Obviously, it makes the problem go away, and it protects them. So we're putting a lot of effort into saying, how do you protect the utilization of the data so that it's not misused in some other way outside the scope of this program? For the carbon accounting platforms and the accountants and the auditors, suddenly you've got an assurable data flow that's machine to machine. Still doesn't make it perfect, it just makes it a hell of a lot better than it is today. And ultimately that will help us on the journey to net zero as a country, because UK SMEs are 50% of our business emissions in the country. So it's not a small problem, but it's a very large ecosystem. So our broad call to action here is to go far, we've got to go together. You see how we've built these coalitions. The tech bit of it is actually quite small in the scheme of things. The biggest effort is around getting everybody in the tent, keeping them there, getting them going together, and then working out legal conditions and terms and all of the non-technical things are the hardest bit. And I think I'd say there's lots of projects I've been involved with over the decades now where they start with the tech. Please don't start with the tech. Start with the use case, the user needs, and the business case. You're much more likely to succeed if you do that. But thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.